They thought she was just the help. To the billionaires in the room, Emily was furniture, something to hold a tray, pour the vintage Dom Perignon, and disappear into the shadows. But arrogance has a funny way of blinding people to the truth. When Jackson Thorne, the city's most notorious and ruthless venture capitalist, laughed in her face and threw a $50,000 stack of cash on the floor, daring the clumsy waitress to entertain his table, he didn't know who he was messing with. He didn't know that under that stained apron lay the heart of a prodigy. He wanted a joke. What he got was a performance that would bring the entire empire of New York's elite to its knees. The air inside the Gilded Lily always smelled the same, a mixture of truffle oil, expensive leather, and old money. It was the kind of scent that lingered on your clothes long after you took the subway back to a cramped studio apartment in Queens, a cruel reminder of the world you served but didn't belong to. Emily Vance adjusted the strap of her apron, wincing as the stiff fabric dug into her shoulder. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Thursday, and her feet were throbbing in the cheap, non-slip black shoes required by management. She had been on her feet for 9 hours straight. "Table 4 needs a refresh on the sparkling, Emily." "Move it," hissed Matteo, the floor manager. Matteo was a man who sweated anxiety. He treated every dinner service as if the president himself were dining, mostly because at the Gilded Lily that was a distinct possibility. "On it, Matteo," Emily said, her voice soft. She kept her head down. That was the first rule of survival here. Be invisible. You are not a person. You are a delivery mechanism for excess. She navigated the dimly lit floor, balancing a silver tray with practiced ease. The restaurant was a cavern of dark mahogany and velvet booths, designed to absorb sound so that deals could be made in whispers. But tonight, Table 4 wasn't whispering. Table 4 was the loudest spot in the room. At the center of the booth sat Jackson Thorne. At 28, Jackson was the kind of handsome that made you angry. Sharp jawline, perfectly tailored suit that cost more than Emily's tuition, and eyes that looked at everything with bored detachment. He was the heir to the Thorne logistics empire, a man whose net worth fluctuated by millions while he slept. Surrounding him were his sycophants, a mix of investment bankers and models who laughed too hard at jokes that weren't funny. "I'm telling you, the market is soft," Jackson announced, his voice carrying over the low hum of jazz. He swirled a glass of whiskey, the ice clinking rhythmically. It's like this place, flashy, expensive, but no soul, just going through the motions." Emily approached the table, the bottle of chilled champagne in her hand. She waited for a pause in the conversation to step in, the polite, trained thing to do. "Excuse me, Mr. Thorne," she murmured, reaching forward to refill the flute of the woman sitting next to him, a striking blonde named Sienna who was currently picking at a lobster tail. Jackson didn't even look at her. He just waved his hand dismissively while continuing his story, his heavy gold Rolex catching the light. "So I told him, if you want the capital, you kiss the ring. It's that simple." As he gestured, his arm swung out wide. It happened in slow motion. His elbow connected hard with Emily's forearm. The heavy bottle of champagne slipped from her grasp. Crash! The sound shattered the atmosphere like a gunshot. Crystal shards exploded across the pristine white tablecloth. Sticky, golden liquid soaked into the fabric, splashing onto Sienna's red dress and, crucially, onto the sleeve of Jackson's bespoke Italian suit. The entire restaurant went silent. The jazz band in the corner actually stopped playing. Emily froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. I am so sorry," she stammered, grabbing a cloth napkin from her apron. "Sir, don't touch me," Jackson said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was freezing cold. He slowly stood up, brushing the droplets from his sleeve with a look of utter disgust. He looked at Emily for the first time, not as a person, but as a stain on his evening. "Do you have any idea?" Jackson began, stepping closer to her, looming over her petite frame. "How much this suit costs? It's worth more than your life's earnings." "It was an accident, sir. You hit my arm." Emily started to defend herself, a fatal mistake in the service industry. "I hit your arm?" Jackson let out a sharp, cruel laugh. He turned to his table. "Did you hear that? The waitress says it's my fault." Sienna laughed, dabbing at her dress. "Clumsy and delusional. Cute combination." Matteo appeared out of thin air, pale and shaking. "Mr. Thorne, I am mortified. Truly. She's new. She's incompetent. I'll handle this immediately. The meal is on the house, of course." "I don't care about the meal, Matteo," Jackson said, his eyes locked on Emily. He saw the fire in her eyes. Most staff would be crying by now. But Emily wasn't crying. She was clenching her fists. That intrigued him. He was a man who liked to break things. "She ruined the vibe," Jackson said, sitting back down and spreading his arms. The music stopped. The conversation died. She turned a $1,000 dinner into a cafeteria accident. "I'll pack my things," Emily whispered to Matteo, turning to leave. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Her mother's physical therapy bills were due on Monday, but she retained enough dignity not to be berated for an accident caused by a billionaire's ego. "Wait," Jackson called out. Emily stopped. "You don't get to just walk away after ruining my night," Jackson said. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it onto the wet table. It landed with a heavy thud. "There is $10,000 in there," Jackson said casually. The room gasped. Emily turned slowly. "What?" "I'm bored," Jackson declared, looking around the room. "The band is boring. The food is boring. And you're a mess. But I'm a gambling man." He stood up again, picking up the envelope and walking over to where the jazz band was set up. He tossed the money into the bewildered pianist's tip jar. "Actually, make it 50, Jackson said, pulling a checkbook from his pocket. He scribbled furiously, ripped out the check, and held it up. $50,000. He walked back to Emily, holding the check inches from her face. "I bet you can't do anything other than carry a tray," Jackson sneered. "So here is the deal. You entertain us. You fix the vibe you destroyed. If you can do something, anything, that impresses me for exactly 3 minutes, the 50 grand is yours. If you bore me, you leave this city. You never work in a high-end spot in New York again. I'll make sure of it." "This is insane," Matteo whispered. "Emily, go to the kitchen." Emily looked at the check. $50,000. That was her mother's surgery. That was rent for 2 years. That was freedom. She looked at Jackson's arrogant smirk. He expected her to run. He expected her to cry. Emily Vance looked down at her sensible black shoes. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in 3 years, she let the mask slip. "Hold this," she said to Matteo, handing him her tray. The silence in the gilded lily was heavy, suffocating. Every eye in the establishment, politicians, actresses, tycoons, was fixed on the slight figure standing amidst the shattered glass. "Emily, don't be stupid," Matteo hissed, clutching the tray she had thrust at him. "He's baiting you. You'll be blacklisted." Emily ignored him. She was looking at Jackson. 3 minutes? She asked, her voice steady, cutting through the tension. Jackson blinked, surprised by her composure. He sat back, crossing his arms, a predator toying with food. 3 minutes. But I warn you, darling, I have front-row seats at the Bolshoi and Broadway. I don't impress easily. "We'll see," Emily said. She bent down. The room murmured in confusion as she reached for her shoes. One by one, she unlaced the ugly orthopedic work shoes and kicked them aside. Then she peeled off her socks. Her bare feet hit the cold, polished hardwood floor. She reached behind her head and pulled the pins from her tight bun. Her dark hair cascaded down her back in a heavy wave. She untied the apron, letting it fall onto the pile of broken glass, revealing a simple black camisole and black trousers underneath. She looked small, vulnerable, but the way she stood had changed. Her posture shifted, her spine elongated, her chin lifted. She wasn't standing like a waitress anymore. She was standing like a queen in exile. Emily walked over to the pianist, a confused elderly man named George. She whispered something in his ear. George looked at her, skeptical. She whispered again, tapping a rhythm on the piano lid. George's eyebrows shot up. He nodded slowly, then turned to the bassist and drummer. "What is she doing? Karaoke?" Sienna giggled from the booth, sipping her wine. "This is going to be tragic." Jackson didn't laugh. He was watching Emily's feet, the arch, the way she gripped the floor. He felt a strange prickle on the back of his neck. Emily walked to the center of the room, directly in front of Jackson's table. The light seemed to dim, though no one had touched the dimmer switch. It was just her presence. She closed her eyes. George played the opening chord. It wasn't a jazz standard. It was a stripped-back, haunting arrangement of Saint-Saëns' The Swan, but with a darker, more contemporary jazz undertone. For the first 10 seconds, Emily didn't move. "Boring," a man from a nearby table shouted, trying to curry favor with Jackson. Then she moved. It wasn't a walk. It was a liquid ripple that started in her fingertips and flowed down her spine. She lunged forward, a movement so sudden and violent it made Sienna jump. Emily began to dance. This was not the polite ballet of a school recital. This was raw, visceral, contemporary dance born of pain. She spun, her bare foot pivoting on the floor with perfect precision. She threw herself into the air, executing a grand jeté that defied gravity, her legs hitting a perfect 180-degree split at the apex. The only sound in the room was the music and the soft thud of her landing, light as a feather, strong as steel. Jackson's mouth parted slightly. He had seen dancers before. He had dated prima ballerinas, but he had never seen anything like this. This wasn't performance. This was a war being fought on the dance floor. Emily wasn't dancing for him. She was dancing at him. She swept across the floor, her movements sharp and accusatory. She mimicked the pouring of wine, the bowing of a servant, and then shattered the image with a violent contortion, twisting her body into shapes that looked painful, beautiful, and terrifying. She used the environment. She slid across a mahogany banister, spun around a pillar, and landed in a deep crouch right in front of Jackson's face. She stared into his eyes, her chest heaving, a bead of sweat tracking down her temple. In her eyes, he didn't see a waitress. He saw a storm. She rose slowly, extending a leg high above her head in a développé that demonstrated impossible flexibility and control, holding it there as the music swelled. The guests at the Gilded Lily had stopped eating. Forks hung in mid-air. The kitchen staff had come out to the swinging doors to watch. Matteo was clutching the tray to his chest, his mouth wide open. Emily began to pirouette. 1, 2, 3. She didn't stop. She accelerated, her arms blurring, a tornado of black fabric and motion. 5, 6, 7. It was a fouette turn sequence, usually reserved for the Black Swan, but she was doing it on a slippery restaurant floor with no warm-up, fueled by pure adrenaline and rage. On the final crashing chord of the piano, she stopped instantly, dropping into a dramatic lunge, her hand extended, palm open, inches from the check Jackson was still holding. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Emily held the pose, her breathing heavy but controlled. She stared at Jackson. 3 minutes, she whispered, her voice carrying through the quiet room. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then, from the back of the room, a single person started clapping. Then another. Then the room exploded. People stood up. Wealthy socialites were cheering. The kitchen staff was applauding. Even the band was nodding in respect. Jackson sat frozen. The arrogance had been wiped from his face, replaced by something he hated: shock. He looked at the check in his hand, then at the woman panting in front of him. He had expected to humiliate her. Instead, she had turned his dare into her coronation. Sienna looked furious. She glared at Jackson. "Well, are you going to pay the help, or are we leaving?" Jackson slowly stood up. The applause died down as everyone waited to see what the King of Wall Street would do. He looked down at Emily, who slowly stood up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't look triumphant. She looked defiant. Jackson reached out and tucked the check into the neckline of her camisole. "You have talent," Jackson said, his voice low, intimate enough that only she could hear. "But you're still just a waitress." He turned to his group. "Let's go. I've lost my appetite." He signaled to his entourage. They scrambled to follow him as he stormed toward the exit, leaving a wake of confusion. Emily stood there, the check burning against her skin. The crowd was still watching her, waiting for a reaction. She reached up, took the check, and looked at it. $50,000. Signed Jackson Thorne. She should have felt happy. She should have felt relieved. But as she watched Jackson's broad shoulders disappear through the revolving doors, she didn't feel like a winner. She felt like a curiosity that had been bought and paid for. "Emily!" Matteo ran over, looking terrified and ecstatic. I didn't know. You're fired." Emily blinked. "What?" "I can't keep you here," Matteo whispered, looking around nervously. "You just upstaged the richest man in New York. He might have paid you, but he'll destroy this restaurant if I keep you. He doesn't like losing." Emily looked at the check, then at Matteo. "Fine," she said, grabbing her shoes. "I quit." She walked out the back door into the rainy alleyway of New York City, clutching a check that could change her life, unaware that the video a diner had recorded on their phone was already uploading, and unaware that Jackson Thorne was sitting in his limousine, watching the security feed of the alleyway on his tablet, his fist clenched. "Find out who she is," Jackson said to his driver. "Find out everything. The rain in New York doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker." Emily walked 5 blocks before she dared to look at the check again. The streetlights reflected off the wet paper, illuminating the sharp, aggressive signature. Jackson Thorne. $50,000. It was more money than she had made in the last 2 years combined. It was a lifeline. But as she stood on the corner of 5th Avenue, shivering in her thin camisole and soaking wet trousers, she felt a profound sense of hollowness. She hadn't danced like that, truly danced, since the accident, since the day her life split into before and after. She hailed a cab, a luxury she never permitted herself. When she gave the driver the address to a crumbling brick building in Queens, he looked at her attire, the wet, expensive-looking clothes, the smeared makeup, and said nothing. Her apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up, a tiny box filled with the smell of old radiator heat and peppermint tea. As soon as she locked the door, she collapsed against it, sliding down to the floor. Her phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again. Within seconds it was vibrating continuously against the hardwood floor like a panicked insect. Emily picked it up, She had 47 messages, all from Jenna, her roommate and only friend from her old life. Ilara, check Instagram, now. OMG Ilara. You are trending. The Waitress. Emily's fingers trembled as she opened the app. There it was, a video, shaky and vertical, clearly taken by someone at table 6. The caption read, "Arrogant billionaire Jackson Thorne tries to humiliate a waitress. She ends him. Haute talent." Gilded Lily. The video had 2.4 million views. It had been uploaded 40 minutes ago. She watched herself on the tiny screen. She saw the rage in her own movements, the desperate precision of her turns. She saw the moment she froze Jackson Thorne with a look that could strip paint. And she saw the comments. Who is she? That's not a waitress. That's a pro. Jackson Thorne looks like he swallowed a lemon. Keep slaying, queen. Emily threw the phone onto the couch. She didn't want to be a viral sensation. She wanted to be invisible. Invisibility was safe. Invisibility meant the debt collectors couldn't find her. Invisibility meant she could work 3 jobs to pay for her mother's dialysis without questions. She walked to the small kitchenette and pulled a prescription bottle from the cupboard. It wasn't for her. It was her mother's heart medication. Empty. She looked at the check again. She had to cash it. Pride wouldn't keep her mother's heart beating. Meanwhile, across the river, in a penthouse that overlooked the entire city like a glass fortress, Jackson Thorne was pacing. The silence in his apartment was absolute, a stark contrast to the chaos of the Gilded Lily. He had poured himself a glass of 50-year-old scotch, but he hadn't touched it. On the massive 80-inch screen mounted on his wall, the video was playing on loop. He watched Emily spin. He watched her lunge. He watched the fire in her eyes. "Sir?" Jackson turned. Standing in the doorway was Marcus, his head of security and private investigator. Marcus was a former MI6 operative who could find a needle in a haystack, provided the needle had a digital footprint. "Tell me you have a name," Jackson said, his voice ragged. He hated not knowing things. In his world, information was currency, and tonight he had been bankrupt. "I do," Marcus said, stepping into the room. He held a tablet. "And you were right to be suspicious. She isn't just a waitress." Jackson snatched the tablet. Name, Emily Marie Vance. Age 24. Education, Juilliard School of Dance. Full scholarship. Jackson's eyes narrowed. Juilliard. Top of her class, Marcus continued. Critics called her the next Pavlova. She was scouted by the Paris Opera Ballet, the Royal Ballet in London, and the ABT here in New York. 3 years ago, she was the most promising young dancer in the world. So why was she serving me champagne in a dive like the Gilded Lily? Jackson muttered, scrolling through the file. He saw photos of a younger Emily, glowing on stage, wearing tutus that cost more than cars. She looked happier, lighter. 3 years ago, her father died in a construction accident. Marcus explained, his voice devoid of emotion. The insurance company found a loophole and refused to pay. 2 months later, her mother, Martha Vance, suffered a massive stroke followed by kidney failure. Emily quit Juilliard 2 weeks before graduation to take care of her. Jackson stopped scrolling. He looked at the photo of Emily's mother. The medical bills listed in the file were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. "She's working 3 jobs, Marcus said. Waitress at the Lily, cleaner at a gym in Brooklyn, and she delivers food on weekends. Every cent goes to St. Jude's Hospital." Jackson looked back at the video on the wall, the moment where Emily lunged at him, the desperation he had mistaken for anger. She wasn't dancing for $50,000 because she was greedy, Jackson whispered, half to himself. She was dancing for her mother's life. He felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't guilt. Jackson Thorne didn't do guilt, but it was something close to respect. And underneath that, opportunity. "The check," Jackson said suddenly. "Did she cash it?" "Not yet. It's 2 a.m., but she will. She has to." Jackson walked to the window, looking out at the rain-slicked city. A plan was forming in his mind, a plan that was cruel, calculated, and brilliant. "Get the car ready, Marcus," Jackson said. "Sir, it's the middle of the night." "I know where she'll be tomorrow morning," Jackson said, a shark-like smile returning to his face. "And I have a proposition she won't be able to refuse." The waiting room of St. Jude's Hospital smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. It was a smell that Emily had come to associate with fear. It was 8 a.m. She hadn't slept. She had gone to the bank the moment it opened, deposited the check, and come straight here. "Miss Vance?" Emily looked up. Dr. Aris, her mother's specialist, stood there with a grim expression. "Is she okay?" Emily stood up, her legs aching from the performance the night before. "She's stable," Dr. Aris said, sighing. "But the dialysis isn't working as well as we hoped. Her kidney function is dropping. We need to look at a transplant sooner rather than later. But I'm still on the wait list," Emily finished for him. "And the insurance creates complications," Dr. Aris admitted. "However, there is a new experimental immunotherapy treatment available in Switzerland. It could strengthen her system enough to accept a transplant more readily. But it is not covered." "How much?" Emily asked. "For the full course, including travel and hospital stay?" Dr. Aris hesitated. "Around $200,000. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. The $50,000 from Jackson felt like a fortune last night. Now it was a drop in the bucket. It would keep the lights on and pay the back debt, but it wouldn't save her mother. "I see," she whispered. "Thank you, Doctor." She walked into her mother's room. Martha Vance was asleep, hooked up to a symphony of beeping machines. She looked so small, her skin pale and translucent. Emily sat in the plastic chair next to the bed and took her mother's cold hand. "I'll figure it out, Mum," she whispered, fighting back tears. "I promise. I'll dance on every table in New York if I have to." "That won't be necessary," the voice came from the doorway. Deep, smooth, authoritative. Emily spun around. Jackson Thorne was leaning against the doorframe. He was wearing a charcoal grey suit that fit him like a second skin, different from the one she had ruined, but equally expensive. He didn't look like he belonged in a public hospital in Queens. He looked like a wolf that had wandered into a petting zoo. "You!" Emily hissed, standing up and moving between him and her mother, a protective shield. "How did you find me?" "Get out." "I have resources, Emily," Jackson said calmly, walking into the room. He didn't look at her. He looked at the machines monitoring her mother. "And I don't like unfinished business." "Unfinished? You gave me the money. I gave you a show. We're done." "Are we?" Jackson turned his gaze to her. His eyes were ice blue, piercing. "I watched the video, Emily. You're good. Better than good. You're wasted carrying trays for Matteo." "I don't care what you think," Emily said, her voice shaking with rage. "You humiliated me. You treated me like an animal. Leave." "I know about the $200,000, Jackson said. The room went silent. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Emily froze. "What?" "The treatment in Switzerland," Jackson said, inspecting his manicured fingernails. "My team spoke to the hospital administration this morning. I know about the debt. I know about the 3 jobs. I know you were the top student at Juilliard before you dropped out." "You have no right." "I have the money," Jackson cut her off. He took a step closer. "And you need it." Emily stared at him. You're offering to pay for her treatment? Why? Out of the goodness of your heart?" She laughed bitterly. "I don't think you have a heart, Mr. Thorne." "You're right, I don't," Jackson agreed smoothly. "This is a business transaction." "What do you want?" Emily asked, narrowing her eyes. "Sex? Because I'd rather starve." Jackson laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Please. I can get sex with a phone call. I need something much more valuable. I need your talent." He pulled a chair out and sat down, crossing his legs. "Have you heard of Alexander Sterling?" Jackson asked. "The tech mogul." "The same. Sterling is about to sell his artificial intelligence division. It's worth $4 billion. I want to buy it. But Sterling is eccentric. He doesn't care about money. He has enough. He cares about culture. He hates Wall Street types. He thinks we are soulless vultures." "He's not wrong," Emily muttered. Jackson ignored the jab. "Sterling is hosting the Sapphire Gala in 3 weeks. It's an invite-only masquerade ball and arts showcase. He refuses to do business with anyone who doesn't appreciate the soul of humanity. He wants to see passion." Jackson stood up and looked Emily dead in the eye. "I need a partner, Emily. I need someone who can walk into that gala on my arm and dazzle him. I need someone who can perform a duet that will make a grown man cry. I need you to play the role of my fiancé, a brilliant, reclusive dancer that I have nurtured back to the stage. It proves I have a soul. It gets me the deal." Emily stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to lie to a billionaire so you can make more billions?" "I want you to act," Jackson corrected. "And dance. Which is what you were born to do." "And in exchange?" "I pay for everything," Jackson said. "The debt, the Switzerland treatment, the private jet to get her there. And I'll give you a stipend of $500,000 when the deal closes." Emily looked at her mother. She looked at the machines keeping her alive. She looked at Jackson, the man she hated, holding the keys to her mother's survival. "I have conditions," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Name them." "I am not your toy. You don't touch me unless it's part of the choreography. And you treat me with respect. If you snap your fingers at me once, the deal is off." Jackson smirked. He extended his hand. "Deal." Emily looked at his hand. It was the hand that had thrown money at her face last night. Now it was offering salvation. She reached out and took it. His grip was warm and firm. "Pack your bags, Emily," Jackson said, not letting go of her hand. "You're moving into the penthouse. We have 3 weeks to turn a waitress back into a prima ballerina. And believe me, I am a much harder taskmaster than Matteo." Emily pulled her hand away. "I'm not doing this for you." "I know," Jackson said, his eyes darkening with a strange intensity. "That's what makes you dangerous, and that is exactly why we are going to win." Jackson Thorne's penthouse wasn't a home, it was a statement. Situated on the 88th floor, it was a sprawling expanse of minimalist Italian furniture, floor-to-ceiling glass, and cold marble floors. It commanded a view of Manhattan that made the city look like a circuit board waiting to be reprogrammed. When Emily arrived with a single battered duffel bag, she felt less like a guest and more like an acquisition being delivered to a museum. Marcus had picked her up from the hospital after she said goodbye to a confused but hopeful Martha. Her mother had been told that Emily landed a high-paying contract for a touring dance company, a lie that tasted like ash in Emily's mouth, but necessary. "Your room is the second door on the left down the east wing," Jackson said, not looking up from his tablet as she entered the main living area. He was sipping an espresso, dressed in workout gear that looked brand new. "Dinner is at 7. Chef Henri is preparing a high-protein, low-carb menu tailored for recovery. You start at 5 a.m. tomorrow." Emily dropped her bag. It made a pathetic thump on the marble. 5 a.m.? We have 3 weeks, Emily. You've spent the last 3 years carrying plates and ruining your arches in cheap shoes. We have to undo the damage. Jackson finally looked at her, his gaze clinical. You're too thin. You have no muscle stamina. Your flexibility is there, as we saw at the restaurant, but your control is sloppy. Sloppy? Emily bristled, the heat rising in her cheeks. I was the top of my class at— You were, Jackson interrupted mercilessly. Past tense is a dangerous place to live, Emily. Right now, you are a liability to my $4 billion deal. Sterling needs to see perfection and passion. Right now, I just see desperation. He stood up and walked over to her. The air between them crackled. He circled her slowly, like a horse buyer inspecting a thoroughbred. The East Wing has been converted into a studio, he said. I've hired Madame Dubois from the Paris Opera Ballet out of retirement. She arrives tomorrow. She will break you down and rebuild you. My job is to ensure you don't shatter completely. The next 10 days were a blur of agony. Jackson wasn't joking. The penthouse studio was state-of-the-art, mirrored walls reflecting Emily's exhaustion back at her. Madame Dubois was a tiny, terrifying woman with a silver cane she used to tap Emily's legs whenever her form faltered. Emily's body screamed. Muscles she hadn't used since Juilliard tore and rebuilt themselves. Her feet bled. She soaked them in ice baths every night, too tired to even cry, and Jackson was always there, watching, criticizing. He didn't just watch from the sidelines. He was part of the torture. Again! Jackson shouted on day 7. They were in the studio. Emily was attempting a complex lift sequence, alone, miming the partner. She was drenched in sweat, her breath ragged. I can't, she gasped, bending over, hands on her knees. My quads are seizing. Sterling doesn't care about your quads, Jackson snapped, walking onto the mats. He cares about the story. You're supposed to be a woman deeply in love, yearning for her partner. You look like you're doing taxes. It's hard to yearn for air when you're suffocating me with criticism, Emily yelled back, straightening up. You know nothing about dance, Jackson. You just know about buying things. Jackson stopped. The silence in the studio was deafening. He took off his watch and set it on a bench. He rolled up the sleeves of his t-shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle. You think I don't know passion? Jackson murmured, stepping into her personal space. You think I don't know what it takes to command a room? He grabbed her waist. His touch was electric, firm and demanding. It wasn't sexual, it was functional, yet it sent a jolt through her entire body. The choreography for the gala is a tango adagio hybrid, Jackson said, his voice low near her ear. It requires absolute trust. Show me the lift. Emily hesitated. You? You can't just jump into a professional lift. Jump! She didn't have a choice. She pushed off the floor, trusting her body memory. She expected him to fumble, to drop her. He didn't. Jackson caught her effortlessly. His hands were positioned perfectly on her ribcage, supporting her weight as she arched her back, extending her leg high in the air. He was strong, much stronger than the male dancers she used to partner with at Juilliard. He held her there, suspended, their faces inches apart. She was looking down at him, upside down. His eyes were intensely focused, not on her body, but on the mechanics of the movement. For 10 seconds, they were perfect, a sculpture of tension and grace. He slowly lowered her until her toes touched the mat. But he didn't let go of her waist. They were breathing in sync, heavy and fast. Emily stared at him, stunned. How? I was a competitive fencer at Yale. National champion, Jackson said curtly, releasing her and stepping back, instantly putting his icy armor back on. Balance, core strength, anticipation, it's all the same physics. Stop underestimating me, Emily. It's boring. He grabbed his towel and wiped his neck. Clean up your lines. We do the partner work tomorrow. Try not to step on me. These shoes cost more than your old apartment. He walked out, leaving Emily trembling in the middle of the studio. She realized, with a sickening lurch in her stomach, that for those 10 seconds in the air, she hadn't hated him. She had trusted him. And that was terrifying. 2 weeks in, the outside world crashed the party. Emily's mother was responding well to the initial treatments, stabilized enough for the looming trip to Switzerland. That was the good news. The bad news was that Emily Vance was no longer anonymous. The internet sleuths had identified the viral waitress. They dug up her Juilliard past, the tragedy of her parents, her financial ruin. The narrative shift was immediate. She wasn't just a feisty waitress anymore. She was a fallen angel, a tragic prodigy wronged by the system. The public loved her. Jackson hated it. "They're turning you into a martyr," Jackson growled, throwing an iPad onto the coffee table. It displayed a New York Post headline, "The Swan Dive. From Juilliard star to serving Jackson Thorne." "I didn't ask for this," Emily said defensively. She was wearing one of the designer dresses Jackson's stylist had bought for her, an emerald silk sheath that cost $4,000. It felt like a costume. "It doesn't matter. It complicates things. Sterling hates publicity whores. We need to control the narrative before the gala," Jackson decided. "Tonight, there's a gallery opening in Chelsea. Low stakes, high art crowd. We make our debut." "As what? Your charity case?" Jackson stepped close to her, adjusting the diamond pendant at her throat, another loner. His knuckles grazed her skin, sending a shiver down her spine that she desperately tried to hide. "As my fiancée, Emily, we need to sell the romance, the tragic artist rescued by the titan of industry. It's cliché, it's gag-inducing, but it works. Tonight you are madly in love with me. Can you act that well?" Emily looked into his cold blue eyes. "I can pretend you're someone else." Jackson smirked. "Good enough." The gallery opening was a nightmare of flashing cameras and forced smiles. The moment Jackson's limousine pulled up, the paparazzi swarmed. Jackson stepped out first, buttoning his suit jacket, the picture of indifferent power. He reached a hand back inside for Emily. As she emerged, the camera flashes were blinding. Jackson pulled her close to his side, his arm around her waist. Protective, possessive. They navigated the crowd inside the gallery, surrounded by abstract sculptures that looked like twisted metal wreckage. People whispered as they passed. "Just keep smiling and look at me like I hung the moon," Jackson muttered under his breath while waving to a senator. Then, the red sea of socialites parted, and Sienna appeared. The woman from the Gilded Lily, the one in the red dress who had laughed when Jackson humiliated Emily, was now wearing silver lame and a look of pure venom. "Well, well," Sienna drawled, blocking their path. She held a martini glass dangerously close to Emily's silk dress. "If it isn't the little serving wench. Did you spill your way to the top, darling?" The gallery went quiet. Everyone loved a scene. Jackson tightened his grip on Emily's waist. "Sienna, you look expensive, as usual." "Don't play coy, Jackson," Sienna spat, ignoring him and glaring at Emily. "Everyone knows what this is. You picked her up off a dirty restaurant floor. How much is he paying you, sweetie? Is it an hourly rate?" Emily felt the old rage bubble up, the same rage that had fueled her dance at the restaurant. She opened her mouth to retort, to tell this trust fund baby exactly where she could shove her martini. But Jackson beat her to it. He stepped slightly in front of Emily, shielding her. His posture shifted from relaxed socialite to street brawler in a suit. His voice dropped an octave, icy and lethal. "Careful, Sienna. Your jealousy is showing. It's unbecoming. Jealousy? Sienna laughed tragically. Of her, she's nobody. She, Jackson cut in, his voice booming through the silent gallery, is the most talented woman in this city. She has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire portfolio, and she is my fiancée. He looked around the room, daring anyone to challenge him. Anyone who disrespects her, disrespects me, and I think you all know how I handle bad investments. He turned back to Sienna, whose face had gone pale. Get out of my sight. You're boring me. It was the ultimate dismissal. Sienna looked around for support, found none, and fled toward the bar. Jackson didn't relax. He looked down at Emily. Are you all right? Emily was breathless. He had defended her, publicly, viciously. It was part of the act. She knew it was part of the act, but the intensity in his eyes felt real. I'm fine, she managed. Good, let's get out of here. The air stinks of desperation. They didn't speak in the limo ride back to the penthouse. The tension in the enclosed space was thick enough to choke on. The adrenaline from the confrontation was still pumping through both of them. When they got out of the elevator into the penthouse foyer, Emily turned to him. Thank you, she said quietly. For what you said back there. Jackson looked at her. The emerald dress clung to her body. Her eyes were wide, adrenaline-fueled, just like that night at the restaurant. I was protecting my investment, Jackson said automatically, loosening his tie. Were you? Emily took a step closer to him. She was tired of the games, tired of the coldness. You're a terrible liar, Jackson Thorne. Jackson froze. He looked at her lips, then up to her eyes. The mask was slipping. You shouldn't provoke me, Emily, he warned, his voice rough. We have a deal. Boundaries. To hell with the deal, Emily whispered. She didn't know what came over her. Maybe it was the weeks of intense physical proximity, the emotional roller coaster of her mother's illness, or the strange rush of seeing this titan of industry fight for her. She reached up and placed a hand on his chest. Over his heart. It was beating fast. Jackson let out a low curse. He grabbed her wrist, intending to pull her hand away, but he didn't. Instead, he pulled her toward him. His other hand tangled into her hair, destroying the expensive updo the stylist had created. He tilted her head back. He stared at her for agonizing seconds, a war raging behind his eyes between control and chaos. If I kiss you, Jackson whispered harshly against her mouth, there is no going back to just business. I know, Emily breathed. Jackson closed the gap. Think silently if needed. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision, a release of weeks of pent-up antagonism and unspoken attraction. Jackson kissed her like he did everything else, with absolute intensity and a demand for total surrender. But Emily didn't surrender. She met him with equal force, her hands gripping the lapels of his jacket, grounding herself in the storm. For 3 days, the penthouse became a sanctuary. The rehearsals continued, but the air had changed. The touch during the adagio wasn't just clinical anymore. It was charged. The lifts were higher, the catches softer. They were dancing on the edge of a precipice, and for the first time, neither of them was afraid of falling. But reality has a way of breaking down doors. 3 days before the Sapphire Gala, Emily woke up alone in Jackson's massive bed. She found him in the living room, shouting into his phone. No, that wasn't the agreement, Sterling. Jackson was pacing, his face pale with fury. He saw Emily and turned away, lowering his voice. We can discuss the valuation after the gala. Fine. He hung up and threw the phone onto the couch. He looked exhausted. What's wrong? Emily asked, wrapping her silk robe tighter around herself. Jackson ran a hand through his hair. Alexander Sterling. He's getting cold feet. He heard rumors about my ruthless acquisition strategies. He thinks I'm going to strip his company for parts." "Are you?" Emily asked quietly. Jackson looked at her. He didn't answer immediately. "It's business, Emily. That was the plan. It's what I do. I buy, I streamline, I profit." Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. So the art, the culture, it was all a lie to get his signature. "It's leverage," Jackson said, his voice hardening, reverting to the man she met at the restaurant. "Don't look at me like that. This deal secures my legacy. It secures your mother's treatment. It secures your $500,000. "I thought," Emily started, then stopped. "I thought this week meant something else. This week was—" Jackson hesitated. A flicker of pain crossed his face, quickly masked. "A distraction. A pleasant one. But the gala is in 72 hours. We need to focus." He walked past her toward his office. "Get dressed. We have a final dress rehearsal at the venue at noon." Emily stood there, feeling the warmth of the last few days evaporate. He was right. She was the hired help. He was the billionaire. The kiss was just a bonus clause in the contract. The night of the Sapphire Gala, the Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed into a dreamscape. Blue lights bathed the Temple of Denda in an ethereal glow. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and money. Emily wore a dress that Jackson had commissioned specifically for the performance, a midnight blue creation that looked like liquid starlight, designed to move as she moved, with a slit high enough to allow for the extreme extensions of their choreography. They stood backstage, the hum of the elite crowd filtering through the velvet curtains. Alexander Sterling was out there, sitting front and center. "Nervous?" Jackson asked. He looked devastating in his tuxedo, but his knuckles were white. "No," Emily said coldly. "I'm doing my job." Jackson flinched. He turned to her, grabbing her shoulders. "Emily, about what I said." "Don't," she cut him off. "Not now. The music is starting." The announcer's voice boomed. "Ladies and gentlemen, a special performance by Mr. Jackson Thorne and his fiancée, Miss Emily Vance." The curtain rose. The music began, a haunting, orchestral version of Wicked Game. They moved. It was flawless. Every lift, every turn, every extension was executed with the precision of a diamond cutter. But there was something else tonight, a raw, aching sadness in their movements that hadn't been there in rehearsal. When Emily pushed Jackson away in the choreography, she meant it. When Jackson pulled her back, desperate and possessive, he meant it. The audience was spellbound. They weren't watching a billionaire and his trophy. They were watching a tragedy unfold in real time. Then came the finale, the lift, the one where she had to trust him implicitly. She ran toward him. He caught her waist, lifting her high above his head. She arched her back, the blue dress cascading down like a waterfall. For a moment, time stopped. She looked down at him. He was looking up at her, and in his eyes she saw the truth. He refused to speak. He wasn't thinking about the deal. He wasn't thinking about Sterling. He was terrified of losing her. He lowered her slowly, sliding her down his body until her feet touched the floor. They ended in a tight embrace, her head on his chest, his hand buried in her hair. The music faded to silence. For 5 seconds, no one breathed. Then Alexander Sterling stood up and began to clap. The room erupted, a standing ovation. They walked off stage hand in hand. Jackson was sweating, his chest heaving. "We did it," he breathed. "Sterling is crying. I saw him. The deal is mine." Emily pulled her hand away. "Congratulations, Jackson. You got what you wanted." She turned to walk toward the dressing room. "Emily, wait." Jackson caught her arm. "Where are you going?" "To pack," she said, her voice trembling. "The performance is over. The contract is fulfilled. You transfer the money for my mother, and I disappear. That was the deal. Screw the deal, Jackson shouted, ignoring the stagehands staring at them. Emily, I don't want you to go. Why? She challenged him, tears finally spilling over. Because I'm a good investment. Because I make you look human. Because I love you. The words echoed in the backstage corridor. Jackson looked shocked that he had said them. I love you, he repeated, softer this time, stepping closer. I didn't think I had a heart left to use, but you woke it up. You danced into my life and wrecked everything, and I don't want to fix it. I don't care about the company. I don't care about Sterling. I just want you. Emily stared at him. You care about the company more than anything. Watch me, Jackson said. He turned and walked back toward the stage wings, where Alexander Sterling was waiting with a team of lawyers and a bottle of champagne. Emily followed him, confused. Jackson, my boy. Sterling beamed, extending a hand. That was transcendent. Truly, I see now. You have the soul of a poet. The company is yours. My lawyers have the papers. Jackson looked at the papers. Then he looked at Emily, standing in the shadows. Keep it, Jackson said. Sterling's smile froze. I beg your pardon? I don't want the company, Jackson said, loud and clear. You were right, Sterling. I was going to strip it. I was going to gut it for profit. It's what I do. But I'm not that man anymore. He turned to Emily and held out his hand. I have a much more important partnership to focus on. Sterling dropped his hand. The lawyers gasped. Jackson Thorne had just walked away from $4 billion. Emily walked out of the shadows. She looked at Jackson's outstretched hand, the hand that had once offered her money, then a contract, and now a future. She took it. You're an idiot, she whispered, smiling through her tears. That was $4 billion. I know, Jackson smiled, pulling her close and kissing her forehead. I'm bad at math. But I think I just became the richest man in the world. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how a spilled bottle of champagne turned into the greatest romance New York had ever seen. Jackson did pay for her mother's treatment, not as a boss, but as a son-in-law. Emily's mother recovered, and Emily didn't just go back to dance. She and Jackson opened the Vance Thorne Foundation for the Arts, giving scholarships to underprivileged dancers who, like her, just needed one chance to shine. Sometimes, the person you think is the villain is just waiting for the right partner to show them how to be the hero. If you enjoyed this story of passion, redemption, and sticking it to the elite, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Share this with someone who believes in second chances. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.